So let us start. मैंने तुम्हें I've sent a few things to you. I don't know if you have opened them or not. If you had opened them, so some of you might have gotten scared, which is fine. It just looks scary at the beginning, but let me just organize everything for you. So बीच में अगर if my screen, my pen gets lost or my voice gets lost, so please do inform me either here, or if you can't do that, so send me a message on WhatsApp. अच्छा जी, so what I am going to do here is that let me just quickly tell you what is the plan and then I'll proceed. It shouldn't take a lot of time, hopefully. These are quite easy, simple things. अच्छा जी, so हमने let me set these things up. First of all, I'm doing it in white background today, so I'm not used with the white colors. So let me first pick up a few colors. ये ठीक हो जाएगा. This should be fine, this should be fine. Black, of course, black will be fine. This grey should be fine. चलो जी, let me start with blue. Okay, मैंने जो अभी तुम्हें चीज़ें सेंड की हैं, let me just quickly first of all tell you that I have been sending you MCQ Bank 2 and starting from Essay Bank 2. So MCQ and Essay Bank 2 are on ADAS. So MCQ Bank 2 is ADAS, Essay Bank 2 is ADAS. Now I discussed this thing briefly with you. The MCQ Bank of ADAS, I had shared that with you earlier. So that is something, if you don't want, so I won't want to repeat it, but for now we are not looking at MCQs anyway. So ADAS का topic specifically, it is going to be tested in MCQs. Anyhow, after ADAS we talked about macro policy. So जो macro policy है उसमें of course you have both essay and MCQ bank. Here again your MCQ bank is not that important. Very few MCQs, I think only 8 MCQs, so I will take you through those. But macro policy is basically an essay based thing, so ये याद रखो. On the right we have essay banks, and then we have the topic of inflation. Inflation को think of it as one of the major topics of the entire syllabus. So inflation के topic में both the MCQ bank and the essay bank, they are both important. So अभी तक हमने ये चीज़ें की हैं, which is actually quite a lot, because as you will see there are around 32 to 34 essay questions on inflation. There are around 80 something questions on MCQ banks of inflation. ADAS में again you have almost 50 sort of MCQs, or macro policy में you have around 16 to 20. I'm not sure about the exact number, but 16 to 20 essay questions. So एक तो अपने ज़हन में ये चीज़, I mean it's always good to be clear about how each topic is tested. So ये तुमने याद रखना है. ADAS basically an MCQ driven topic in itself. I mean the specific questions on ADAS. And उसके अलावा policy is essays. Inflation is both MCQ and essays. Now what I am going to cover today are these essay questions on inflation. Now उसमें you can already see those questions on the left, but let me first, अभी ना देखना screen पे जो भी left पे लिखा हुआ है, just look at this thing that I am writing over here. So inflation के topic में again remember the breakdown. We have learned about the measurement of inflation, and then we have looked at the rate versus the absolute वाली जो सारी debate है, we looked at that, and then we looked at the causes of inflation, and finally we looked at the consequences of inflation. So this is the sort of thing, the sequence in which we have learned this topic. So as far as the essay bank on inflation is concerned, सबसे पहले you will have questions on the measurement of inflation. Those are question 1 to 5. Then rates versus absolute pay, you don't get essay questions, so this is from the essay perspective, this topic. Measurement pay, you have some questions. You don't have questions on rate versus absolute changes. There are a lot of essay questions on causes, and there are a lot of essay questions on consequences. Now I will in turn break these down for you कि causes पे क्या फ़र्क typical questions हैं. Similarly, what are the typical questions on consequences. But let me start off here with the first thing. which is measurement. Now, as far as the measurement of inflation is concerned, let me just develop that idea over here and then we'll take it on from there. जो तुम्हारी measurement of inflation है उसमें तुमने याद रखना है, there are just a few steps. So I'm writing the steps that we learned. You have to select a basket of goods. Now this is exactly what we will be looking at in these questions, so that is why I'm writing it here once. So you calculate or select a representative basket of goods, you record prices, you give weights का formula तुमने याद रखना है. The significance is you are reflecting the importance of each product in terms of whether it is commonly used product by an average citizen या कोई लोग इस्तेमाल करते हैं. And the formula is that weight of any product, such as weight of product A, is equal to the spending on that product A divided by the total spending. उसके बाद, as the fourth step, you calculate the weighted price, which is simply the weight of product A into price of product A plus weight of product B into price of product B, weight of product B into the price of product B. और जब ये weighted price आ जाती है तुम्हारे पास for a given year, you then convert it into weighted price index. So VP for weighted price index में तुमने उस सारी चीज़ को कैलकुलेट करना है, and this weighted price index is equal to your CPI or consumers price index, which is equal to the country's price level. Don't forget the sixth step, that once we have price level for year 1 and year 2 and year 3 and so on and so forth, then finally in the last step we say actual inflation is equal to the percentage change in price level from one period to another period. Now ये जो steps हैं, I mean you have to memorize those steps. इन्हीं में मैंने तुम्हें बताया था you can find the problems of measuring inflation. First problem is difficult to find a representative basket. Difficult to find a representative basket. And then prices में भी मैंने तुम्हें बताया था, it is difficult to specify. So DIFF for difficult. So difficult to specify which price. इसकी explanation याद रखना कि if you talk about price of, let's say, bread, then there are different brands of breads, there are different qualities of bread, and there are different prices of breads throughout the year. So this is where we are saying कि भाई कौन सी कीमत, that in itself is something which is practically it can create problems and difficulties. And similarly जब हम weights की बात करते हैं तो we are assuming we know the average total spending of an average consumer. We are assuming we know कि on average how much is spent on this product by a typical consumer, which are again difficult to get to a precise number. You won't be able to ever come up with weightages that truly reflect the spending of every other citizen in your economy. So you can get close to it, but you can obviously never get to the perfect answer कि किस product का कितना weight है. So those are the sort of things that I have explained you. Those are the sort of things that we have learned. इसके बाद the questions जो measurement पे तुमने आने, I mean you have to simply repeat those things. So those will be questions number 1 to 5. Let us now look at them. ये line क्या आ गई है यार इधर?
सर ये किसी ने Zoom पे किया हुआ है तो आपकी Zoom वजह से होगी.
I see. अच्छा वो किसी से गलती से हो गया होगा. That's all right. मैं तुम्हारा वो ऑप्शन क्लोज कर देता हूँ, so you can't write it. पता नहीं कहाँ गई वो ऑप्शन. I remember there is an option. चलो try to avoid it यार. Try to avoid it. It's fine. Okay, disable annotations. अच्छा जी. So again I have repeated these things. अब इनको questions पे apply कर लेते हैं. And actually let us make use of being online. Let me just bring this all over here. So we have these things over here. Let me put them over here. Actually, So we look at these questions. 4.1 measurements of inflation, question 1 to 5. The questions should now start looking to you very simple and repetitive. So explain how the rate of inflation is measured. It's the same exact repetition of what I have just explained. So again, I have been highlighting to you, वो पूछे या ना पूछे. I mean, I shouldn't say वो पूछे या ना पूछे. You were just asked, explain how the rate of inflation is measured. इसमें the sort of mistakes that I want you to avoid. Again, first of all, always start off by explaining what is inflation. Inflation is the percentage change in price levels from one year or from one period to another. From one period to another. So this is something which, again, I mean, I'm not so much in favor of definitions, but A level वाला तुम्हारे marks काट लेगा कि तुमने define नहीं किया inflation को. This is where I always tell you, if the question is to discuss something, तो अपने आप को बताया करो कि ये छोटी मोटी definitions के नंबर नहीं मिलने. It's a proper serious question. I have to actually discuss issues. Explain वाले questions में, I mean, I don't see a reason तुम्हें question क्यों नहीं आना चाहिए, but अगर question पूरा नहीं भी आ रहा तो make sure that you start defining whatever term you see. You will definitely get some marks for it. So explain how rate of inflation is measured. Define inflation. Give all of these steps. इसमें again highlight the importance, the meaning of weights. Make sure you give the formula of weights. मैंने तुम्हें index का यहाँ पे formula नहीं दिया, but when you talk about कि you have a weighted price index and you need to convert it, weighted price आ जाती है and you need to convert it into index. So index का भी तुमने formula ज़रूर लिखना है वहाँ पे, which is the weighted price in, let's say, year A will be the, let me write it again, the weighted price index in year A will be the weighted price of year A divided by the weighted price in the base year multiplied by 100. So just give this formula. उसके अलावा don't start constructing examples with numbers. इन क्वेश्चंस में पूरे न्यूमेरिकल टेबल्स बनाने की तुम्हें कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है. यू कैन ऑलवेज talk in terms of these variables, weighted price A over base year, and you don't have to actually come up with the numbers. It's a complete wastage of time. Acha ji. So if you look at the other questions, they are all the same. Discuss the methods and problems involved in constructing an accurate measure of the rate of inflation. So this question is for 12 numbers because तुमने ये तरीका बताने के बाद you have to highlight these problems. Again, as I told you in the class, there can be other problems that we can come up with and discuss and explain. There are some very interesting problems that you will find up. लेकिन अगर किसी बुक में से देखते हो and from your O level you remember some of those problems, fine. Otherwise I have just given you these simple ones because, as I told you in the class, this is the sort of question where you will have to use it. So यहाँ पे you have 3 difficulties, so more than enough. If you want to add one more, let me give you one easy one. Difficulty base year की जो selection है, which again is something which is not really a problem. A level वाला तुम्हें नंबर दे देता है कि look, you have to select a base year, so you have to make sure that that base year is some normal economic year. You don't want to pick up I have been telling you again and again that randomly with closed eye you can select any year as a base year. Now A level वाला उसको बिल्कुल random रखने की बजाय he wants you to say that look, you have to at least ensure that that year which you are selecting as a base year is at least normal economic year. It's not a year where you get once in a lifetime recession. It's not a year where the country, let's say, was at war. It's not a year maybe when you had coronavirus. So that is what we mean, that at least it should be a year of normal average economic activity. So इस तरह से you can fill up these 4 points that you can write in the problems that you might encounter when you try to measure inflation. उसके बाद third question is asking you to discuss whether it is possible to construct a consumer price index that is an accurate measure of the changes in the cost of living of households. It is exactly the same question. The wording has changed, so it is asking you whether it is possible to construct consumer price index that is an accurate measure of change in cost of living. So you will again explain, okay, this is how consumers price index is measured. उसमें concept याद रखना कि this, it is basically a fancy way of calculating the price of this representative basket of goods, so that will link it up with this cost of living कि जब inflation हो रही है तो cost of living बढ़ रही है. Now is CPI a good accurate measure of all of this? That is basically another wording for asking you that what are the problems that you will encounter and what are the difficulties you will encounter as you go along measuring your consumer and price index through this method. So it's the same question, slightly different wording. Question number 4, explain the difficulties of measuring inflation accurately. Now this is where you have to be sensible. यहाँ पे it is directly asking you to explain the difficulties of measuring inflation. So again it will be the same answer, but इसमें याद रखो, don't go into the details of these steps. Keep these steps very very short and very very simple to the point कि okay, these are the methods through which we have to measure inflation, and then as quickly as possible try to come up to these problems, because ये question तुम्हें ज़्यादा उसकी तरफ focus करवा रहे हैं. Explain the difficulties. Obviously you will have to tell कि okay, how is it measured, उसके भी कुछ marks होंगे, and then you get the rest of the marks by explaining the difficulties. अच्छा जी, the last question. So पहले चारों questions they are exactly the same. Last question on measurement of inflation is asking you, explain why it is important to have an accurate measure of inflation. Now these are the sort of what I call one-off questions. ये बार बार नहीं पूछा जाता. It's a one-off questions, and this is where you have to use your common sense. बिल्कुल पसीने ना छोड़ के बैठ जाना. Don't just put your hands up in the air कि we haven't memorized this thing in the class. With once you know कि अच्छा सारा इन्फ्लेशन का इशू क्या है, and you know generally just think about it, use your common sense, and it is a difficult question because as I said it's a one-off question. So what you will do is, पहले तो explain का question है. So inflation का word है, you explain what is inflation and then explain very quickly that it is estimated through the measurement of this consumer's price index. एक दो नंबर तुम यहाँ पे cover कर लोगे. Then tell yourselves that I am left with 6 numbers as to why measuring inflation is important. So to cover yourself for these 6 marks, just tell yourselves I have to come up with some 3 sensible logical reasons. बताओ मुझे, you have to answer this question. I'm not going to tell it to you directly. What are the things that come to your mind? Any 3 points why it is important to measure inflation accurately. It is not saying is it possible to measure inflation accurately. उसमें तो हम मज़े से वो घिसे पिटे रट्टे लगाए हुए problems बता देते हैं. This question number 5 over here is asking you whether it is important to have an accurate measure of inflation. Anybody? Let's try to collect 3 points over here. कोई 3 points? Anybody can come up with any 3 points?
सर अगर मतलब हमें अंदाज़ा हो जाएगा कि आगे कैसी इन्फ्लेशन, तो उसी के मुताबिक हम अपनी प्लानिंग्स वगैरह कर सकते हैं.
Very very nice. So that is the first point. Future policy. You base your or you can, I mean I am calling it future policy, but I mean the policy for the future that you are devising sitting today as government, as policy maker. When you make that policy, remember I have been telling you that inflation is one of the most important macro indicators. So all of your policy many times it just revolves around first of all knowing okay what is the rate of inflation, and then you decide कि okay इसको कम करना है, ज़्यादा करना है, and therefore what sort of policy are we going to implement. So to begin with, if your measurement of inflation is wrong, then obviously you will end up making a wrong policy. So for instance, let's assume that the actual rate of inflation is 15%, but you inaccurately measure inflation to be 5%. So this is where we will say that look, 15% inflation is too much inflation. That would have required contractionary fiscal and contractionary monetary policy, but government को अगर पता चलेगा कि सिर्फ 5% inflation है, तो then maybe they will enact, as opposed to contractionary, they may enact expansionary monetary, expansionary fiscal policy. So this is how you squeeze marks out of this point. Often when you see the marking schemes such as in these questions, तो examiner तुम्हें उसमें लिखेगा any 2 points explained in detail or 3 points explained in less detail. Now, more detail simply means that you give all the sequence, all the chain of reasoning, all the logic behind कि अच्छा why is it important कि future policy बनानी है तो inflation accurate हो. So that is where you just sort of explain things in your own words, becomes more of a writing task than knowing economics. Point तुमने बिल्कुल सही बताया है. Some of you will just write it matters for future policy. एक नंबर लेके आ जाओगे. Some of you will elaborate it कि sitting today, if we have to decide expansionary, contractionary monetary policy, you base that decision on the rate of inflation today. So if that rate of inflation is wrong, then your future policy will be wrong. So that is the first thing, the first reason why an accurate measurement of inflation is important. Well done, Amna. और इसके अलावा मुझे बताओ, any point comes to anybody's mind? एक तो it is required so that you can come up with accurate policy for the future. कोई वजह सोचो why it is important. I mean, another good way of thinking about it is अपने आप से पूछो गड़बड़ क्या हो जाएगी if you have wrong inflation numbers. What may go wrong?
कंज्यूमर्स की स्पेंडिंग कम हो जाएगी इन्फ्लेशन की वजह से. कंपैरिजन किया जा सकता है बिफोर ईयर्स से, पास्ट ईयर्स से इन्फ्लेशन कैसी थी.
नहीं, देखो, आई मीन इफ द गवर्नमेंट इज मेजरिंग रॉन्गली दैट इन्फ्लेशन इज 25% बट इट इज़ लेट्स से 2%, तो आई एज अ कंज्यूमर आई वोंट चेंज माई स्पेंडिंग कि गवर्नमेंट कितनी इन्फ्लेशन बता रही है.
सर इससे हो सकता है कि जो लेंडर का कॉन्फिडेंस है वो कम हो जाएगा, क्योंकि हमें पता नहीं कि कितनी एक्यूरेट है, तो लेंडर्स कम लेंड करना स्टार्ट कर देंगे. और इससे
आई मीन यू आर about at the right point but not exactly there. लेंडर की एक्टिविटी नहीं कम होगी because you are again doing that mistake. I mean, मैं nit picking कर रहा हूँ. Your answer is closer to being correct than Rumesa's answer. Rumesa थी ना पहले, हाँ. तो देखो, but you are still doing sort of the same mistake कि कंज्यूमर की lending कम हो जाएगी. If I am a lender and if I am looking around and I am told कि अच्छा inflation is 3% and I base my lending on that, तो lending तो काम नहीं हुई. But after some time I will realize कि ओह मैं मारा गया. I set up this lending and borrowing contract thinking inflation is 3%, but inflation तो कुछ और थी. The government was wrong. So what will that do? And the way you elaborate that point in a better way is that there will be more arbitrary redistribution of wealth between lenders and borrowers. So let's assume I am a lender and मुझे गवर्नमेंट फिगर्स बता रही है इन्फ्लेशन इज़ 5% एंड आई लैंड यू 100 रुपीज़ एंड आई एग्री विद यू दैट आफ्टर अ ईयर यू कम बैक एंड पे मी 105. आई एम कवरिंग माई सेल्फ फॉर इन्फ्लेशन, or I am thinking that I am covering myself for inflation. But if the actual rate of inflation is 15% and the government was wrong, so I as a lender unintentionally end up redistributing income to this borrower. उसके बाद तुम कह सकते हो कि look, this then means that lenders will be discouraged to lend. So वही बात, you have the right point, उसको थोड़े अच्छे तरीके से step by step think in your mind if you have to explain this thing. तो सीधा इस चीज़ पे ना जाओ that lenders will stop lending, you will fetch a mark. Better way is that lenders will first suffer because the rate of inflation they thought or they assumed when they were deciding the rate of interest they have to charge, that turns out to be something different from what the actual inflation is. So lenders will be hurt. There will be this arbitrary redistribution of wealth between lenders and borrowers, and ultimately that would mean that lending activity in the economy will go down. Very good. You have 2 points. तीसरा सोचो. It's really very very simple to think about the third point. It's related to first. आज तुम इन्फ्लेशन का रेट देख के फ्यूचर पॉलिसी सेट करते हो. इसी से रिलेटेड एक और पॉइंट सोचने की कोशिश करो. गिव मी वन मोर पॉइंट. ये क्वेश्चन तुमने पूरा करना है, देन विल मूव ऑन.
सर वो टैक्सेस वगैरह.
गुड पॉइंट, गुड पॉइंट. कैसे? बट यू हैव टू एक्सप्लेन इट. डिपेंड्स हाउ वेल यू एक्सप्लेन इट. क्या जेन में आ रहा है? रॉन्ग इन्फ्लेशन नंबर्स, क्या मसला पड़ेगा टैक्सेशन में?
सर मतलब अगर हमारी मतलब प्राइसेस अगर ज़्यादा हैं अगर मतलब इन्फ्लेशन हमने ये अज्यूम किया कि इन्फ्लेशन आगे कम होगी, तो हम मतलब ये सोच के बैठे होंगे कि जो हमने टैक्सेस लेने हैं, कलेक्ट करने हैं, इनडायरेक्ट टैक्सेस वगैरह, वो कंपैरेटिवली हम
क्या पूरी नहीं की बात, देखा पूरा, यू कांट एक्सप्लेन इट, फिर से सोचो। एनीबडी एल्स, जल्दी करो, आई वोंट मूव ऑन, तुमने पूरा करना है क्वेश्चन, आई एम
सर
टेलिंग
वो
यू।
जो आपने एग्जांपल दी थी कि पहले एक लेबर की इतनी होती थी सैलरी, अब इतनी होती है, तो
एग्जैक्टली,
जो
इनकम
बैंक
टैक्स
ने इंक्रीज
ब्रैकेट्स,
किया टैक्स, तो वो जितना इंक्रीज करेंगे वो जो होगा वो थोड़ा सा उसमें
Yes.
प्रॉब्लम आएगी और फिर लेबर डिस्करेज होगा इस तरह से।
exactly, that is a good point, income tax brackets it, but this is a good point, but this is difficult to explain, this is still difficult to explain। एक आसान पॉइंट इसमें ऐड कर लो। एक हमने कहा था आज बैठे हुए, टू मेक प्रॉपर फ्यूचर पॉलिसी यू नीड टू नो व्हाट इज़ द रेट ऑफ इन्फ्लेशन टुडे। मुझे ये बताओ, हाउ डू यू मेजर द सक्सेस ऑफ मैक्रो पॉलिसी? Central bank, whether it is controlling the economy in a nice way or not, whether its monetary policy is a success, whether it is being able to achieve the targets of its monetary policy, how do you guess all of that? How do you judge all of that? Usme again, inflation is one of the key macroeconomic indicators. So even when you have to judge the success of your policy, you look at whether you have been able to control inflation or not. सो अगर असल में इन्फ्लेशन 15% पे चल रही है एंड यू रॉन्गली मेजर इट एट 5%, देन यू विल रीच अ रॉन्ग कंक्लूजन एज टू वेदर योर पॉलिसीज हैव बीन सक्सेसफुल और नॉट। ठीक है, सो आई मीन आई वांटेड यू टू वर्क योर माइंड अ बिट। इस क्वेश्चन पे मैंने टाइम ज़ाया किया है, जो डोंट वांट यू टू बॉग डाउन विद दिस क्वेश्चन। एज यू कैन सी, मेजरमेंट पे सीधा सीधा पूछा जाता है, दिस इज़ अ वन ऑफ क्वेश्चन। द रीज़न एंड व्हाट आई वांट टू टीच यू आउट ऑफ दिस क्वेश्चन इज़, वन ऑफ क्वेश्चन आ भी जाता है जिसका एग्जैक्ट तुमने पहले से तैयारी नहीं भी की हुई, जस्ट ट्राई टू बी सेंसिबल, या कोई तुमने बड़ी तोपें नहीं चलानी, you just have to tell you 6 मार्क्स लेने हैं, 8 मार्क्स लेने हैं, I have to come up with any 2-3 logical points। मुझे बताओ, any question on this measurement of inflation पे, should we move on? Anybody? चलो, अगर इसके बारे में कुछ नहीं पूछना तो लेट अस मूव ऑन टू द कॉजेज ऑफ इन्फ्लेशन। अगेन घिसे पिटे, बहुत ही रेपिटेटिव क्वेश्चन, बट देर आर 3-4 डिफरेंट वैराइटीज, सो लेट मी टेक यू थ्रू देम। क्लास पे से ज्वाइन कर लो, वी आर जस्ट लेफ्ट विद 5 मिनट्स, तो बीच में ख़त्म हो जाएगी। सो लेट मी स्टार्ट अ न्यू सेशन एंड यू कैन देन ज्वाइन अगेन।